The keys felt heavier than they should have when I signed for my Montana ranch. I'm Marcus Sullivan, 55 years old, and I'd just spent $385,000 of my retirement savings on 15 acres near Glacier National Park. 30 years of civil engineering work, Army Corps pension, careful investing through 2 market crashes, all converted into timber, mountains, and the peace I'd earned the hard way. Then my son-in-law called 3 days later and said his parents were moving in. If I didn't like it, I could sell and move back to Phoenix. I didn't say anything on that call, but I left a surprise that would turn their lives upside down. Let me back up. After retiring from the Army Corps of Engineers in Phoenix, I spent 6 months looking for the right property. Not just any cabin, something that would hold value, provide workshop space, and give me the solitude I dreamed about during 30 years of project deadlines and office politics. The realtor in Whitefish, Montana showed me photos of this place: log cabin with stone foundation, detached workshop barn, and mountains that stretched to Canada. No neighbors for 2 miles, no traffic noise, just elk, deer, and the kind of silence that lets a man think. The drive from Phoenix took 16 hours, but when I pulled into that gravel driveway and cut the engine, I knew I'd made the right choice. 4 elk grazed 100 yards from the cabin. They looked up, studied my truck with those big dark eyes, then went back to eating. Smart animals. They knew this was home. I spent the first week setting up my workshop exactly the way I'd planned during those last months in Phoenix. Tool boards organized by function, not alphabetically like some amateur. Table saw positioned where morning light would hit the work surface. Lathe set up near the power panel for efficiency. Everything in its proper place, engineered for workflow. I'd dreamed of mornings drinking coffee while watching wildlife instead of Phoenix traffic jams. This was it. My daughter Sarah called that first Friday evening. Her voice came through bright and excited. "Dad, are you really there? Did you get the ranch?" "Sign the papers Monday," I said, rocking on the porch I'd already started reinforcing. "I'm watching elk graze right now. 4 of them, including a big bull with antlers that would make a taxidermist weep. I'm so proud of you. You earned this after everything you've been through." Her voice carried that warmth that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to provide for her growing up, especially after her mother died when Sarah was 12. Single father, military career, trying to be both parents while deploying to construction sites across 3 states. Something in her tone made me pause, though. "Everything okay with you and Trevor? He treating you right?" "Oh, fine. You know how middle management is. Trevor's been stressed with work lately. Budget cuts, layoffs, the usual corporate drama." She laughed, but it sounded thin, forced. "Sometimes I forget what peaceful even looks like. Your ranch sounds like paradise." We talked another 15 minutes about safe topics: her 3rd grade teaching job, my plans for the workshop, whether I'd seen any bears yet. When we hung up, I sat watching sunset paint the mountains orange and purple. The coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway, savoring the quiet. No sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls, no construction crews starting at dawn, just wind in the pines and the distant sound of elk moving through the trees. Monday evening changed everything. My phone rang during dinner, leftover chili I'd made too much of, old habit from cooking for one. Trevor didn't bother with hello or how are you settling in. My parents lost their house. They're moving in with you for a few months until they find something permanent. My hand tightened on the armrest of my chair. I set down the spoon carefully, buying myself a second to process. "Wait, what?" "Trevor, I just bought this place. It's barely big enough for one person, and I specifically chose it for the solitude. For a few months. I'll text you their arrival time. They'll be there Friday morning. I bought this property to be alone. I spent my entire retirement savings, my Army pension, everything I'd saved for 30 years. Then you should have stayed in Phoenix where there's plenty of help for old folks." His voice carried that edge I'd heard before, the tone he used when discussing business mergers or employee terminations. Cold, final, no room for negotiation. Friday morning. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the clearing where the elk had been earlier. They'd moved on, following some ancient pattern of feeding and shelter. Smart animals always knew when to leave a place that wasn't safe anymore. Inside, I poured coffee I didn't want and sat at the kitchen table I'd built from local pine during my second week here. From my jacket pocket, I pulled a small engineering notebook, the kind I'd carried for 30 years. Grid paper for sketches and calculations, spiral-bound for durability. I started writing. Not emotional venting or angry letters I'd never send, but questions, timeline estimates, resource assessments. The same methodical approach I'd used for bridge inspections and foundation problems. Who were Douglas and Patricia Walsh really? Why had they lost their house? What was Trevor's real financial situation? How long was a few months in reality? What were my legal rights as a property owner? 30 years I'd been the reasonable one, the peacemaker, the man who swallowed inconvenience to keep family peace. During Sarah's teenage years, I'd bitten my tongue when Trevor started dating her senior year of high school. Bit it again when they got married too young, when he talked her out of graduate school, when he moved her 400 miles from me to Phoenix for his career advancement. Always the reasonable father-in-law, never wanting to cause problems for Sarah. Not anymore. Dawn found me still at the table, empty coffee cups forming a semicircle around my notepad, which had grown dense with lists, diagrams, questions written and rewritten in my careful engineer's handwriting. I hadn't slept, didn't need to. My mind felt sharp in a way it hadn't for years, focused and crystalline, operating on something cleaner than rest. This felt familiar. The way I'd felt before difficult construction projects, when everything had to be planned perfectly because lives depended on getting it right. I made fresh coffee and studied my notes. Then I cleaned up methodically, loaded my truck with purpose, and drove the 45 minutes to Whitefish. Time to start gathering intelligence. The Glacier National Park Ranger Station sat about 20 minutes west of Whitefish, a modern building designed to blend with the landscape like something from my old Army Corps projects. Inside, educational displays showed wolf packs, bear territories, elk migration patterns, the kind of detailed information that could be useful to someone who understood how to read between the lines. A ranger, maybe 35, with the weathered face and alert eyes of someone who spent more time outdoors than behind a desk, looked up from his paperwork. "Help you with something?" "Just moved up from Phoenix," I said, pulling out my small notebook and adopting the slightly confused tone of a city retiree. "Bought a place off Highway 40, beautiful area, but I keep hearing stories about bear activity. Want to make sure I'm not doing anything stupid that might attract them." He smiled, the patient expression of someone who'd answered this question 100 times. "Smart thinking. Black bears are common, grizzlies less so, but they're around. Main thing is food storage. Don't leave attractants out unless you want visitors. What about wolves? My neighbor mentioned they're back in the region." I kept my voice casual, just another nervous newcomer asking obvious questions. He stood and moved to a wall map, pointing to areas marked with colored pins like a military briefing display. "Reintroduction's been successful. 3 established packs in this area." His finger traced territories that included land within a few miles of my ranch. They're usually shy around humans, but they've got incredible sense of smell. Can detect prey or food from miles away, especially when the wind's right. I took careful notes, asking follow-up questions about wind patterns, seasonal behavior, pack movement. Every word calibrated to sound naive and concerned, exactly what he'd expect from a nervous retiree who'd watched too many nature documentaries. The ranger seemed happy to educate me, pointing out denning areas, migration routes, feeding patterns. "You hunting up there?" "No, just curious. Want to be prepared and respectful of the wildlife." I mentioned again that I was from Phoenix and still learning about mountain life, every word designed to reinforce the image of a harmless newcomer who needed guidance. Back in Whitefish, I found Rocky Mountain Outfitters, the kind of store with taxidermy on the walls and racks of camouflage gear that reminded me of military surplus shops near every base I'd ever been stationed at. The camera section sat between hunting equipment and security systems, exactly where I'd expected it. "Looking for wildlife cameras," I told the clerk, a grizzled man in his 60s who probably knew every hunter in 3 counties. "Want to monitor bear activity near my property, maybe get some photos of elk for my daughter back in Phoenix." He showed me 2 models with motion activation, night vision, cellular connectivity. "These Trailmaster Pro units will do you right. We get lots of folks wanting to keep an eye on their land. Motion sensors are sensitive enough to catch a squirrel, battery life runs 6 months easy. $420 for 2 cameras, memory cards, and mounting hardware." I paid cash, mentioning casually that I'd just retired from engineering work in Arizona and was still figuring out the technology side of ranch life. Another piece of the harmless newcomer image, building a paper trail of an innocent man trying to adapt to rural Montana. Wednesday afternoon, I installed the cameras with the same methodical precision I'd brought to surveying bridge sites for 30 years. One covering the driveway approach from a concealed position in a large pine, one angled toward the front porch from behind a natural rock outcropping. The engineering part of my brain found deep satisfaction in the work, calculating sight lines, testing motion sensor ranges, adjusting positions until the coverage was perfect. Hide them enough to be unobtrusive but obvious enough that anyone looking would find them easily. Position for optimal capture while maintaining plausible deniability. Test the motion activation, check signal strength, verify the cellular connection to my phone. Both cameras connected with weak but functional service, enough to send alerts and photos when triggered. That evening, I sat in my workshop sketching plans for a bookshelf Sarah had mentioned wanting for her classroom. Working with my hands always helped me think, and the familiar rhythm of measuring, marking, planning gave me space to consider my next moves. The workshop smelled like pine shavings and machine oil, honest smells that reminded me why I'd left corporate life behind. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for what I had planned. I drove to Whitefish Meats, a butcher shop that served local ranchers and restaurants. The owner, a thick-set man with forearms like tree trunks, didn't even blink when I made my request. "Need about 30 pounds of beef scraps," I said. "Organ meat, fat trimmings, whatever you've got that's too rough for human consumption. Got some wild dogs been raiding my garbage. Figure I'll bait them away from the house. You got it, partner. $65 for a good mix." The meat came wrapped in white butcher paper, loaded into coolers I'd brought specifically for this purpose. The smell hit me immediately. Blood, fat, raw flesh, the kind of scent that would travel for miles on the right wind. Thursday afternoon, I stood in the clearing behind my cabin with the coolers open, studying the landscape like a battlefield commander. The wind came from the west, steady and reliable. I checked it the old way my grandfather had taught me during hunting trips in Michigan, wetting my finger and holding it up, feeling which side dried first. Then I walked 50 yards from the cabin, positioning myself upwind, but within clear sight lines of both camera positions. The placement had to be precise, close enough to draw predators into the monitored area, far enough from the building that they'd focus on the bait instead of investigating the structure, visible enough from the cameras to create compelling footage. I spread the meat in 3 separate piles, maximizing scent dispersion while creating multiple points of interest. Not random placement, but calculated distribution based on wind patterns and natural wildlife movement corridors I'd observed during my first weeks here. I wasn't trying to endanger anyone. I was trying to provide an educational experience about the realities of mountain living. Back inside the cabin, I moved through each room methodically, the same way I'd done final inspections on construction sites. Windows locked and latched, unnecessary electronics unplugged, thermostat set to 55 degrees. Enough to prevent pipes from freezing, but not enough to waste money heating space for uninvited guests. I was protecting my investment while setting my educational demonstration. I packed a single duffel bag with essentials, clothes for a week, my important documents, the external hard drive with 30 years of project photos and engineering plans, and the framed picture of Sarah at her college graduation. Everything else could stay. This ranch represented my life's work, but it was still just property. What mattered was teaching certain people that they couldn't simply take what belonged to others. I took one last look at the workshop I'd spent weeks organizing, at the kitchen table I'd built with my own hands, at the view that had made all those years of early mornings and long deployments worthwhile. Then I locked the door without hesitation and drove toward my old life in Phoenix. The drive took 16 hours with stops for gas and coffee. I pulled into the driveway of my Phoenix house just after midnight Thursday, the suburban place I hadn't yet sold, still partially furnished but feeling hollow after the mountain silence. I unloaded my truck, set up my laptop in the living room where I could watch the camera feeds, propped my phone where the cellular signal from Montana could reach me. Then I settled in to wait. Friday morning at 10:47, exactly when Trevor had promised, a sedan appeared on my phone screen. The cameras captured everything in high definition. Douglas and Patricia Walsh emerging from their car like they owned the place, looking around with expressions I recognized even on the small display. Displeasure mixed with entitlement, the faces of people who'd expected better accommodations. "This is where Marcus is living now?" Patricia's voice came through clearly on the camera microphone. She wrinkled her nose like she'd detected something offensive. It smells like pine trees and dirt. How rustic. At least it's free, Douglas replied, walking toward the cabin with the confident stride of a man who'd never been told no. We'll stay a couple months while Trevor figures out our next situation. Beats paying rent somewhere. Patricia stopped at the porch steps, studying the cabin like she was evaluating real estate. I don't see why we had to come all the way out to this wilderness. Trevor could have just put us up in a nice hotel until we found something permanent. Because hotels cost money, Pat. This doesn't. Douglas tried the front door, found it locked, then started looking around for hidden keys or unlocked windows. Besides, Marcus owes us this much after everything Trevor's done for that daughter of his. I watched them circle the cabin, testing windows, peering through glass, acting like landlords inspecting their property. The arrogance was breathtaking, but not surprising. This was exactly what I'd expected from people who thought they could simply claim someone else's home because it was convenient. Then Patricia froze mid-sentence, her hand flying to her throat. Douglas. Oh my God, Douglas. 3 shapes had emerged from the northwest tree line exactly as I'd hoped. Gray and brown forms moving with the fluid grace of natural predators, drawn by the scent of the meat I'd strategically placed. Not aggressive toward the humans, not even particularly interested in them, just hungry animals following their noses to an easy meal. The wolves moved with casual confidence, the way they'd moved through these mountains for thousands of years before subdivision developers and city planners had tried to turn wilderness into suburbs. Beautiful animals, really, doing exactly what wolves were supposed to do. Douglas saw them and went white as fresh snow. His voice climbed 2 octaves. Get in the car! Get in the car! Right now! They ran. Patricia stumbled on the gravel, recovered, kept running. Car doors slammed with enough force to make the sedan rock. The engine started with a grinding sound that suggested Douglas was flooding it in his panic. Gravel sprayed in a wide arc as they reversed wildly down the driveway, then accelerated toward the main road like they were escaping a natural disaster. The wolves, completely unbothered by the human drama, continued their approach to the meat piles. They sniffed carefully, alert but unafraid, then settled in to feed. Natural behavior in their natural habitat, doing exactly what they'd evolved to do. I closed the laptop, picked up my coffee, and took a slow, satisfying sip. The educational demonstration had been even more effective than I'd hoped. My phone rang 23 minutes later. Trevor's voice had lost its corporate authority, replaced by raw fury mixed with something that might have been fear. What did you do? My parents nearly got killed up there. I didn't do anything, I replied, keeping my voice level and reasonable. I warned you this property is in the wilderness. Wolves live in these mountains. This is their natural habitat. Maybe you should have researched local wildlife before assuming you could use my home as a hotel. You set this up. You baited those animals. This was planned. Trevor, I live in wolf country now. Wildlife exists on my property year-round. I can't control where wild animals choose to hunt or what they choose to eat. Good luck explaining to a sheriff how I'm supposed to manage the behavior of protected species. You think you're smart, don't you? You think this is funny? I think your parents learned something valuable about mountain living, knowledge that could prevent real problems in the future if they'd bothered to ask before showing up uninvited. This isn't over, Marcus. Not even close. No, I said calmly, it's just beginning. And next time you want to threaten me or make demands about my property, remember that you're dealing with someone who spent 30 years solving problems that actually mattered. Your little power games don't impress me. The line went dead, but I could picture Trevor's face. Could imagine him realizing that the reasonable father-in-law he'd been pushing around for years had just demonstrated that reasonableness had limits. I opened the laptop again and watched the wolves finish their meal before disappearing back into the forest. Perfect predators returning to their perfect wilderness, leaving behind nothing but picked clean bones and the knowledge that some lessons couldn't be taught gently. 3 weeks passed before Trevor made his next move, and I spent those days getting reacquainted with Phoenix heat while planning my return to Montana. The suburban house felt wrong now. Too many neighbors, too much traffic noise, air that tasted like exhaust and swimming pool chemicals instead of pine and mountain air. But the isolation gave me time to think, to plan, to prepare for what I knew was coming. I used the time productively, researching Montana property law, estate planning strategies, and the legal rights of property owners dealing with family pressure. The Phoenix Public Library had excellent legal databases, and my engineering background served me well in parsing complex statutes and precedents. I filled 3 notebooks with carefully organized information, building a foundation of knowledge that would serve me well in the coming battle. Mid-April brought the call I'd been expecting. Sarah's voice carried a tremor that reminded me of when she was 8 years old and had broken my favorite coffee mug, afraid of disappointing me. "Dad, please." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been rehearsing them. Trevor showed me the security footage of what happened with his parents. Those wolves could have killed them. What if they'd gotten out of the car? What if they'd been inside the cabin when it happened? I set down the wrench I'd been using to fix a leaky faucet. Even in Phoenix, I couldn't stop working with my hands. Sarah, honey, wolves have lived in those mountains for thousands of years. I didn't create that situation. I warned Trevor this wasn't appropriate housing for people who don't understand mountain life. But you knew they were coming. You could have done something to make it safer, put up warning signs, or cleared away whatever attracted the wolves, or at least been there to help if something went wrong. Every phrase sounded rehearsed, coached. My daughter had been turned into Trevor's messenger, and the realization made my chest tighten with a familiar anger. The same feeling I'd had watching bullies target smaller kids during my own school years. "I bought that property for solitude," I said, keeping my voice level despite the emotion building inside. No one asked if I was willing to host guests. No one considered whether it was safe or appropriate. But I'm willing to meet with Douglas and Patricia to discuss options if they're genuinely interested in finding housing solutions. "You are?" Hope flooded her voice, the same tone she'd used as a child when asking if we could go to the zoo or get ice cream. "Really? You'd do that?" "I'll meet them in town. Neutral ground. We'll talk like adults about realistic options." But even as I said it, I was researching rental agreements and property management laws, preparing for a meeting that would go exactly as I expected it to go. 2 days later, I drove back to Montana for the meeting, my truck loaded with legal research and a determination to document everything. The drive gave me 16 hours to think, to prepare, to steel myself for what would either be a reasonable conversation or the opening shot in a larger war. I met Douglas and Patricia at the Glacier Grill on Central Avenue in Whitefish, a small local restaurant with wooden tables and landscape photographs that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with Montana in the first place. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing my position with the same tactical awareness I'd learned during Army Corps training. Table near the window, back to the wall, clear view of the entrance, within range of the security camera I'd spotted above the register. They arrived exactly on time, walking in with the confidence of people who expected to get their way. No pleasantries, no coffee orders, just straight to business like I'd summoned them to receive instructions. "Marcus, this has gone on long enough," Douglas said before he'd even fully sat down. "We need those keys today. We've been staying in a motel for 3 weeks and it's costing us money we don't have." "We're not here for small talk," Patricia added, her voice carrying the entitled tone of someone who'd never been denied anything she wanted. "We're here because family is supposed to help family in times of need." I pulled the rental agreement from my folder and slid it across the table with the deliberate care of an engineer presenting technical specifications. I agree completely, which is why I've prepared a proposal that protects everyone's interests. Douglas glanced down at the document, then back up at me, his face reddening like a man discovering his coffee was cold. "A rental agreement? You're actually charging us rent to stay in your extra space? Market rate for a furnished mountain property in this area. $1,600 monthly, 6-month lease minimum, standard terms including utilities and maintenance responsibilities. You want money from your own family?" His voice climbed toward the ceiling, drawing glances from other diners. "From people who have nowhere else to go?" Patricia leaned forward across the table, her expression shifting to wounded disappointment. "I never thought you were this kind of person, Marcus. Greedy and cold-hearted, taking advantage of people in their time of greatest need." I stood calmly, collected my folder with the same precision I'd used to pack surveying equipment, and picked up my coffee cup. Not because I needed it, but because the gesture conveyed normalcy, control, the behavior of someone who wasn't rattled by emotional manipulation. "Then I guess we don't have an agreement," I said in the same tone I'd used to explain engineering problems to contractors who didn't want to hear bad news. You'll need to find alternative housing arrangements. Good afternoon. I nodded politely to the waitress on my way out, left a tip on the table despite not ordering food, and walked to my truck with the measured pace of someone who had important work to do elsewhere. That evening, sitting in my ranch kitchen with a view of mountains that stretched to Canada, my phone became a weapon aimed at me from multiple directions. The first call came around 6 p.m. Marcus? It's Linda. My cousin's voice carried concern mixed with confusion. I heard from Trevor that you've been having some difficulties. He's worried about you, said you're isolated up in the mountains, acting strangely, making decisions that don't seem like you. The strategy revealed itself with crystalline clarity. Trevor was building a narrative, planting seeds of doubt with every family member he could reach, creating a foundation for whatever legal challenge he was planning. Linda, I'm fine, I replied, settling into my workshop chair where I'd been sketching plans for a dining table Sarah had mentioned wanting. I retired to Montana because I'd planned this move for years. That's not strange behavior. That's following through on a carefully considered life decision. He said there was an incident with wild animals and that you refused to help his parents when they had nowhere else to go. That doesn't sound like the Marcus I know. That's an interesting version of events. Trevor's parents showed up at my property uninvited, encountered local wildlife in their natural habitat, and left. I offered them a reasonable rental arrangement that they rejected. Thanks for checking on me, Linda, but I'm doing exactly what I planned to do, enjoying my retirement. 20 minutes later, another call. Jim Patterson, a former colleague from the Army Corps, using the same script with different words. Trevor had reached out, expressing concern about Marcus's mental state, his isolation, his increasingly erratic behavior. The third call came at 8:30 p.m. Sarah again, but this time her voice carried anger instead of tears. You embarrassed them, Dad, in public? At a restaurant where people could hear? What were you thinking? I offered them a fair business solution to their housing problem. They chose to reject it and create a scene instead. A rental agreement? Dad, their family, Trevor's parents. They lost their house and needed help, and you treated them like strangers. And this is my home, my retirement, my one place of peace that I bought with money I saved for 30 years. Money I earned while raising you alone after your mother died. Money I could have spent on vacations or new cars or any of 100 things that would have made my life easier. The words came out harder than I'd intended, carrying decades of sacrifice that I'd never wanted to use as a weapon against my daughter. But something about being painted as the villain for protecting what I'd worked for my entire adult life had opened a valve I usually kept closed. Trevor was right, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow hurt more than shouting. You have changed. You've become someone I don't recognize, someone cold and selfish. The line went dead. She'd hung up on me. I sat in my workshop, surrounded by tools I'd collected over 3 decades, looking at plans for furniture I'd wanted to build for the daughter who now thought I was a stranger. 3 calls in one evening, all delivering the same message. Marcus Sullivan is unstable, dangerous, unreasonable. The isolation I'd sought for peace was being weaponized, turned into evidence of mental decline. Trevor wasn't trying to take the ranch anymore. He was trying to destroy my credibility first, make me seem incompetent, turn the family against me so that when he made his real move, no one would believe my version of events. Classic strategy for someone who understood how to manipulate systems and people. I opened my laptop and began typing, channeling 30 years of technical writing experience into the most important email I'd ever composed. Mr. Richard Garrett, attorney at law. I'd found his name through the Montana State Bar website, cross-referenced with local property law specialists and client reviews. Careful research, just like selecting contractors for major construction projects. I laid out the situation in factual language, no emotion bleeding through the professional tone. Family pressure over property ownership, potential claims against my assets, need for legal advice regarding asset protection and estate planning. I included the basics: my age, property value, family situation, and 3 specific questions about elder law and conservatorship challenges. The email went out at 9:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I followed it with a phone call Wednesday morning. Garrett's assistant scheduled me for Thursday afternoon, standard consultation fee of $375 per hour, bring all relevant documentation. Professional, efficient, exactly what I needed. For the next 48 hours, I organized documentation with the same methodical precision I'd brought to managing bridge construction projects. Everything labeled, dated, cross-referenced in a system that would make sense to someone else if necessary. Property deed in one folder, purchase documents and inspection reports in another, family tree diagram showing relationships and potential inheritance claims, written timeline of events starting with Trevor's initial call, transcripts of key phone conversations reconstructed from my detailed notes. Thursday afternoon found me in Richard Garrett's office in Whitefish, a professional space with law books, framed University of Montana degree, and a window overlooking the main street that reminded me why I'd chosen this area for retirement. Garrett was about 50, Montana weathered, with the direct manner of someone who'd grown up on a ranch before law school changed his trajectory. I presented my documentation in sequence, each document handed across at the appropriate moment in my narrative. Property papers, family diagram, timeline, evidence of the smear campaign building against me. Garrett took notes, asked clarifying questions that demonstrated he understood both the legal and personal dimensions of my situation. Mr. Sullivan, I have to say this is the most organized intake presentation I've seen in years. You've documented everything systematically. 30 years in civil engineering. Problems don't get solved without accurate documentation and clear analysis of cause and effect relationships. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against a legal pad covered with notes. Here's my assessment. Your son-in-law is attempting to establish grounds for claiming you're incompetent or need oversight. The smear campaign, the stories about dangerous behavior with wildlife, the isolation narrative, these are preliminaries to what could become a conservatorship challenge. Conservatorship. The word hit like cold water. Legal guardianship that would strip away my right to make decisions about my own life, my own property, my own future. It's a tactic that's become more common as baby boomers age and accumulate assets their families want to control. Not always successful, but it can tie up your assets in court for months or even years while they argue you can't manage your own affairs. What's the best defense? Prove conclusively that you are managing your affairs competently, which is exactly what we're doing right now. Revocable living trust with an independent trustee, comprehensive medical evaluation, financial planning documentation. I'll be frank, it'll cost about $3,200 in legal fees, but it makes you essentially untouchable from a legal standpoint. Do it. How soon can we have everything in place? 6 weeks for the complete package. Trust documents, medical evaluations, financial restructuring. We'll build a fortress around your assets that no family member can breach. Following Garrett's advice, I drove to the Whitefish Public Library instead of heading straight home. Sometimes the most important intelligence gathering happened in the most mundane places, and public computers provided a level of anonymity that my home internet connection couldn't match. I chose a corner terminal, back to the wall. Old habits from years of working in potentially hostile environments during Army Corps deployments. I accessed the Arizona Public Records database, something I'd learned to navigate during property disputes on construction projects. These systems held information that most people never thought to look for, financial breadcrumbs that told stories about debt, assets, and the kind of mistakes that desperate people made when they thought no one was watching. I entered Sarah and Trevor's Phoenix address and started downloading their property history. Mortgage records, tax assessments, lien filings, all of it public information available to anyone who knew where to look. What I found made my hands tighten on the mouse. Home equity line of credit, $45,000. Dated 8 months ago. Single signature authorization. Trevor Walsh only. In Arizona, under specific circumstances involving spousal employment verification and credit history, one spouse could secure a HELOC without the other's signature. But hiding it from Sarah? That crossed the line from legal technicality into betrayal. I printed the documents, hands steady despite the anger building in my chest. Each page represented another piece of evidence that my daughter was married to a man who viewed her as a financial resource rather than a partner. The HELOC application included employment verification, credit checks, and income statements that painted a picture of financial pressure I hadn't fully understood. But where had the money gone? $45,000 didn't just disappear without leaving traces. That evening, back at my ranch with documents spread across my kitchen table, I called Garrett's office. His assistant put me through immediately. "Richard, I found something. My daughter's house has a $45,000 HELOC that she doesn't know about, taken out by her husband 8 months ago. Arizona allows single-spouse HELOCs under certain conditions, but hiding major financial decisions from a spouse creates legal vulnerabilities. Has she discovered it yet? No, and I'm not sure when or how to tell her. But this explains his motivation. He's not just trying to get free housing for his parents. He's trying to cover existing debts using my property as collateral. That's a significant development. We need to understand the full scope of their financial situation before moving forward with the trust. Can you research the parents' situation as well? 2 days later, I received a call that filled in more pieces of the puzzle. Sarah, her voice tired and strained in a way that reminded me of her teenage years when she'd had problems she didn't know how to solve. Dad, I need to tell you something about why Douglas and Patricia lost their house. She paused, and I could hear her choosing words carefully. Trevor told me not to mention it, said it would just worry you unnecessarily, but I can't keep lying to you. What happened, honey? Douglas was gambling, online poker, sports betting, some kind of cryptocurrency thing that Trevor never fully explained to me. He lost $75,000 over about 18 months. That's why they lost the house. It was mortgaged to cover the gambling debts when his regular income couldn't handle them anymore. $75,000. The number settled in my mind like the final piece of a structural engineering problem. Douglas's gambling addiction led to his financial ruin, which created pressure on Trevor to help his parents, which led to the $45,000 HELOC Trevor had hidden from Sarah, which still wasn't enough to solve the problem, which led to the scheme to claim my ranch as free housing. Dad? Are you still there? I'm here. Thank you for telling me. That explains a lot about why Trevor has been so insistent about the housing arrangement. He's been so stressed lately. Sometimes I hear him on the phone late at night, talking about solutions and restructuring family assets and how we need to think long-term about everyone's financial security. Her voice carried the confusion of someone who was hearing pieces of conversations without understanding the full context. What kind of solutions? Something about putting your ranch into a family trust eventually, so it could benefit everyone when you, in the future. For estate planning purposes, he said. And he mentioned that the property value has probably already gone up significantly since you bought it in March. Every word was another piece clicking into place, a family trust, with Trevor as trustee, no doubt. That would give him control over my property while making it look like reasonable estate planning. The ranch would become an asset he could leverage for loans or sell entirely if the financial pressure became too great. When did Trevor suggest this trust idea? A few weeks ago, after the incident with his parents. He said it would be good for tax purposes and family security. I don't really understand estate planning, but it sounded responsible. It is responsible, when done properly. That's why I've been consulting with an attorney this week to make sure everything is handled correctly. You're setting up a trust? Dad, that's wonderful. Trevor will be so relieved to know you're thinking about family financial planning. After we hung up, I sat in my workshop staring at plans for a bookshelf that suddenly seemed less important than the legal documents I needed to finish. I added detailed notes to my growing file. Douglas's $75,000 gambling debt. Trevor's $45,000 HELOC. Sarah's innocent mention of family trust discussions that revealed Trevor's real endgame. He wasn't just trying to house his parents, he was trying to gain control of my assets to solve a financial crisis that began with his father's gambling addiction and continued with his own secret borrowing against Sarah's home. The ranch represented $385,000 in equity that could solve all their problems if he could just find a way to access it. But there was still one piece missing. How was Trevor planning to force me out of the picture? The smear campaign was just preparation. The real attack would come soon, and I needed to be ready for it. I called Garrett's office and left a message. Richard, we need to accelerate the timeline on that trust. I think we have less time than we originally thought. His response came via email an hour later. Understood. Can you come in Monday morning? We'll prioritize your case and have initial documents ready by end of week. I sat on my porch that evening, watching elk move through the clearing in the last light of day, and realized that the peaceful retirement I'd imagined was about to become a war fought with legal documents instead of weapons. But it was still a war, and I intended to win it. Monday morning found me at Dr. Williams' clinic in Whitefish. a modern medical building that reminded me of the field hospitals I'd worked around during overseas deployments. Clean, efficient, designed for serious business. I'd called Friday afternoon requesting the earliest possible appointment for a comprehensive evaluation, and Dr. Williams had agreed to see me first thing. I'm 55, own significant property, and want baseline medical documentation proving my physical and mental competency, I explained to the receptionist when I arrived 15 minutes early. I need a detailed written assessment for legal purposes. Dr. Williams was a sharp woman in her mid-40s with the calm competence of someone who'd practiced rural medicine long enough to handle everything from hunting accidents to family disputes over inheritances. Her expression showed immediate understanding when I explained the situation. Unfortunately, I've encountered situations like this before. Adult children or family members sometimes challenge an older person's competency to gain control of assets, especially when significant property is involved. That's exactly what I'm trying to prevent. Can you provide documentation that would stand up in court if necessary? Absolutely. I'll conduct comprehensive cognitive testing and provide a formal letter suitable for legal proceedings. The examination took 2 hours. Blood pressure, reflexes, comprehensive blood work, then extensive cognitive testing. Mini mental state examination, clock drawing test, memory recall exercises. She asked me to draw a clock showing 3:15. I drew it precisely, with proper number placement and correct hand positions. She asked me to remember 3 words: apple, table, penny, and recall them after completing other tasks. I remembered all 3 without hesitation. She asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I did so accurately and quickly. When finished, Dr. Williams typed her assessment directly into the computer, then printed a formal letter on clinic letterhead. Mr. Marcus Sullivan is mentally competent, physically healthy, and fully capable of managing his own affairs and making independent decisions regarding his property and finances. Patient is alert, oriented, and cognitively intact. No signs of dementia, confusion, or diminished capacity. $320 for the extended evaluation, every penny worth it for the legal protection it provided. 3 weeks later, I sat in Garrett's conference room signing trust documents. 52 pages total, every signature line flagged with yellow tabs, every provision designed to protect my assets from exactly the kind of family pressure I was facing. The revocable living trust designated Garrett as independent trustee, with clear instructions for asset management and distribution. The critical provision appeared on page 23. Beneficiary Sarah Sullivan Walsh inherits property and assets only upon divorce from Trevor Walsh or upon Trevor Walsh signing a legal waiver of all claims to trust assets. This conditional inheritance clause will likely create significant family conflict, Garrett warned as I reviewed the documents. Are you prepared for Trevor's reaction when he discovers this structure? The conflict already exists. This just protects Sarah from being exploited through my property. If Trevor has legitimate intentions, he can sign the waiver. If he doesn't, that tells us everything we need to know. Once Trevor discovers this trust exists, he'll likely escalate his tactics. Legal challenges, adult protective services complaints, possibly direct confrontation. Let him try. Everything here is legal, properly documented, and designed to withstand challenge. My signature was steady on every page. When finished, I wrote a check for $3,200 and left with copies of everything in a sealed envelope. Over the following 2 weeks, I systematically transferred every asset I owned into the trust structure. Bank accounts, retirement funds, investment accounts, even my truck registration. Each phone call followed the same pattern. Identify myself, request beneficiary change forms, explain the trust structure, confirm documentation requirements. By mid-June, my legal fortress was complete. Every asset protected, every vulnerability addressed, every potential attack route blocked by proper documentation and professional legal structure. 2 weeks later, Sarah called with news that confirmed my timing had been perfect. Dad, Trevor has been acting so strange lately. Asking detailed questions about your finances, whether you've updated your will, what kind of estate planning you've done. He got really angry when I mentioned you'd set up a trust, called it a betrayal of family values. Why would my estate planning betray him? He has no legal claim to my assets. That's what I said, but he got furious. Started talking about how you're cutting the family out and being manipulated by lawyers who just want your money. Dad, what's really going on? Why does he care so much about your financial arrangements? That's an excellent question, honey. One you should probably ask him directly. The confrontation came sooner than expected. I was reinforcing the porch railing, a project I'd been putting off, when Trevor's car came fast up the gravel driveway, spraying rocks and dust. He jumped out before the engine stopped, stormed toward me with the aggressive posture of someone who'd finally lost control of his temper. I calmly set down my tools, retrieved my phone from my pocket, and started recording video. The motion was deliberate, obvious, designed to let him know that whatever happened next would be documented. "Trevor, you're on my property uninvited. I'm recording this conversation for both our protection. I don't care about your recording." His face was red, movements sharp and aggressive. "You set up some legal scheme to steal from your own daughter. The trust protects my assets and ensures Sarah inherits appropriately. It's completely legal and professionally structured." Appropriately? What does that mean? Unless she divorces me? That's what you really want, isn't it? The trust ensures my property isn't subject to claims by third parties. That's standard estate planning recommended by every attorney who handles family wealth. Third parties? I'm family. I'm her husband. You're my daughter's husband. You have no legal claim to property I earned before you knew her, and the trust simply formalizes that legal reality. His voice climbed toward shouting. "We'll see about that. I'll contest this. I'll prove you're incompetent. I'll make sure you never see Sarah again. You're threatening to isolate my daughter from me because I protected my own property from your financial schemes. That's very interesting. This isn't over, Marcus. Then leave my property immediately or I'll call the sheriff for trespassing." He stormed back to his car, gravel flying as he spun out and sped toward the main road. I stopped recording and immediately uploaded the video to cloud storage, then emailed a copy to Garrett with the subject line, "Evidence, hostile confrontation with threats." Garrett's response to the confrontation video came within 2 hours via email. "Continue documenting everything. Consider additional medical evaluation if needed. Expect retaliation through official channels. They're running out of legal options." The retaliation came exactly 1 week later. I was organizing my workshop, building storage solutions for tools I'd accumulated over 3 decades, when an unfamiliar sedan pulled into my driveway. A professional woman in her 40s emerged carrying a tablet and official folder, the kind of government-issued materials that immediately put me on alert. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Margaret Preston from Adult Protective Services. I'm here regarding a complaint filed about your welfare and living conditions." The flash of anger was immediate, but I kept my expression neutral and professional. "A complaint filed by whom? I can't disclose the complainant during my initial assessment, but I'm required to investigate all reports of potential elder abuse or neglect. May I come inside and talk?" "Of course. I should tell you up front that I'm involved in a property dispute with family members, and I suspect this complaint is part of that conflict rather than genuine concern about my welfare. I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Sullivan. I'll conduct my assessment objectively, and if the complaint proves unfounded, I'll document that clearly in my report." Margaret walked through the ranch methodically, documenting everything on her tablet. Kitchen clean and well organized, bills paid and filed systematically, refrigerator stocked with fresh food, bathroom tidy and well maintained, bedroom orderly with no safety hazards, workshop properly organized with tools in good repair. She asked about my daily routine, social contacts, medical care, financial management. "Do you have difficulty managing daily tasks like cooking, cleaning, or paying bills?" "No difficulty at all. I've lived independently since retiring from engineering work. I manage everything myself, including property maintenance and financial planning." The complaint mentions concerns about your mental state and decision-making capacity. "Have you experienced memory problems, confusion, or difficulty with complex tasks?" I retrieved my medical evaluation folder from the desk. I had a comprehensive medical and cognitive assessment specifically to address concerns like this. I handed her Dr. Williams' detailed letter. She read the assessment carefully, taking notes. "This is very thorough and recent. Most people in situations like this don't have current medical documentation readily available. I anticipated false allegations and wanted objective evidence prepared. I also have financial records, legal documentation, and communication records that demonstrate competent management of my affairs." Margaret spent another hour reviewing documents, asking detailed questions about my social connections, support systems, and daily functioning. Her professional demeanor remained neutral, but I recognized something in her questions. She'd seen this pattern before: family members weaponizing the protective services system to gain leverage in financial disputes. 10 days after Margaret's visit, I received official notification. Adult Protective Services case closed. Complaint determined unfounded. The report stated clearly, subject is competent, living independently and safely. Property well maintained, finances managed appropriately, no evidence of exploitation or neglect. Recent medical evaluation confirms cognitive and physical health. Complaint appears motivated by family property dispute rather than genuine welfare concerns. 3 days later, Garrett obtained copies of the original complaint through legal channels. I read it in my workshop, hands steady despite the rage building inside me. Trevor and Douglas had signed as co-complainants, with Patricia providing a supporting statement. The allegations were specific, detailed, and completely false. Claim: Marcus threatened family members with weapons. Completely false. I'd never owned firearms, and the only threat was my promise to call the sheriff for trespassing. Claim: Exhibits paranoid behavior, including excessive security cameras. The cameras existed for legitimate property protection after documented threats. Claim: Refuses medical care and exhibits confusion about basic tasks. False. I'd just completed comprehensive medical evaluation. Claim: Makes irrational financial decisions, including suspicious legal arrangements. The trust was sophisticated estate planning, not irrational behavior. Patricia's supporting statement twisted the wolf incident into evidence of deliberate endangerment, claiming I'd lured wild animals to attack innocent visitors. The complaint requested mandatory psychiatric evaluation and possible conservatorship proceedings to protect me from myself and prevent further harm to family members. I created a new folder labeled APS False Complaint Evidence and filed everything systematically. The original complaint with its false allegations, Margaret's assessment report, the case closure letter, my medical evaluation, photographs of my well-maintained property, and my written rebuttal to each false claim with supporting documentation. While building this file, Garrett called with news that would change everything. Marcus, I found something significant during background research on your case. Douglas and Patricia have been using your ranch address for official correspondence. Public records show mail being delivered there in their names: Montana Department of Family Services, Social Security Administration, and First Mountain Credit Union. I stared out my workshop window at the mailbox by the road, realizing I'd never thought to check for mail addressed to people who didn't live here. What kind of correspondence? Benefits applications, bank account statements, official government forms. They're claiming Montana residency using your property as their address, but your security footage proves they've never actually lived there. That's federal mail fraud at minimum, possibly benefits fraud and identity theft. How serious are we talking about? Mail fraud carries up to 20 years in federal prison. Benefits fraud adds another 5 years. If they're receiving government assistance based on false residency claims, we're looking at multiple felonies that would destroy their credibility in any legal proceeding. I grabbed my truck keys, wondering what other evidence was sitting in my mailbox waiting to be discovered. I'm heading down there now to check. The quarter-mile drive to my mailbox felt longer than usual, gravel crunching under my tires as I considered the implications. If Douglas and Patricia were committing federal crimes using my property, they'd handed me the leverage I needed to end this conflict permanently. I pulled on gloves before opening the mailbox. I wanted no fingerprints on mail that wasn't mine. Inside, I found 4 envelopes, all addressed to Douglas Walsh or Patricia Walsh at my ranch address: Montana Department of Family Services, Social Security Administration, First Mountain Credit Union, and something from the IRS. I photographed each envelope carefully with my phone, front, back, postmarks clearly visible, dates documented. Then I placed them in evidence bags I'd brought specifically for this purpose and drove back to the house. This wasn't just about free housing anymore. This was organized fraud using my property as the base of operations. Garrett forwarded the evidence package to Assistant U.S. Attorney James Morrison in the Economic Crimes Division the next morning. Within 48 hours, Morrison called me directly, his voice carrying the professional authority of someone who'd prosecuted financial crimes for years. Mr. Sullivan, Attorney Garrett provided compelling evidence of organized benefits fraud using your property address. I've reviewed the security footage, mail records, and your sworn statement. This appears to be a clear pattern of federal crimes. I never gave permission for them to use my address for anything. The security cameras prove they visited once briefly and never returned. I've reviewed the footage. It clearly shows a single visit lasting less than 30 minutes, followed by no further presence on the property. Meanwhile, we have mail records showing ongoing correspondence for over 3 months. That establishes intent to defraud federal and state agencies. What happens next? Federal investigation, which typically takes 4 to 6 months for cases this clear-cut. I'll be frank with you, this will likely result in felony charges. Mail fraud, benefits fraud, possibly conspiracy charges if we can prove coordination between the subjects. I'm not trying to destroy their lives, but I won't allow my property to be used for criminal activity. You're doing exactly what any responsible citizen should do. We'll handle the investigation from here. While the federal wheels began turning, Garrett continued his background research and discovered information that explained Trevor's increasing desperation. He called me while I was building a storage cabinet for Sarah's classroom, a project that helped me think through complex problems. Marcus, I found something critical in the Arizona property records. Trevor and Sarah's home has 4 missed mortgage payments totaling $11,200 in arrears. Notice of default was filed last week. I set down my router and walked to the porch, needing air and space to process this information. How long before foreclosure? In Arizona, typically 90 to 120 days from notice of default. But here's the interesting part. There's an unconventional option available to us. What kind of option? Banks routinely sell defaulted loans to collection companies and investment firms at significant discounts. You could purchase Trevor's debt anonymously through an intermediary company. You'd become the creditor, but he'd never know the true identity of who owns his mortgage. The implications settled over me like Montana morning mist, slowly, then completely. That would give me total control over whether Sarah keeps her home. Yes, but it's ethically complex. You'd hold the power to foreclose or forgive, to negotiate terms or demand immediate payment. It's legal, but it gives you enormous leverage over your daughter's future. I walked the perimeter of my property that evening, following the fence line I'd repaired during my first month here, considering the moral dimensions of what Garrett had proposed. If I bought Trevor's debt, I'd control his financial future. That was power I'd never wanted over anyone. But if the bank foreclosed anyway, Sarah would lose her home through no fault of her own. She was innocent in all this. The next morning, I called Garrett with my decision. Do it. Buy the debt. But Sarah doesn't know until I can explain everything properly. The transaction took 2 weeks to complete. $42,000 from my savings account to an intermediary firm that specialized in distressed debt purchases. They created Glacier Ridge Holdings LLC with me as the beneficial owner, purchased the defaulted mortgage, and sent Trevor official notification that his loan had been sold to a new creditor. Trevor received the notice, but no information about who now controlled his financial future. By late July, my strategic position had been transformed completely. Douglas and Patricia faced federal investigation that would likely result in felony convictions. Trevor's mortgage debt was secretly under my control. Every attempted manipulation was documented with professional legal precision. My own assets were protected behind an impenetrable trust structure. But I felt no triumph, only the weariness that comes from necessary battles fought on ground you never wanted to defend. This was supposed to be peaceful retirement among mountains and wildlife. Instead, it had become a financial war, where my opponents had forced me to use every weapon at my disposal. The final phase would require something more difficult than legal strategy. It would require confronting my daughter with truths that would shatter her understanding of her marriage and her husband's character. She deserved to know what kind of man she'd married, what dangers threatened her home, what her father had been protecting her from. But first, I needed to prepare one more piece of evidence that would make the truth undeniable. I called Sarah on a Thursday evening, timing the call for when Trevor would be at his weekly poker game, a detail she'd mentioned months ago without realizing its significance given his father's gambling problem. "Honey, we need to talk. Can you come to the ranch this weekend? Just you. It's important. Is everything okay? You're worrying me." "Everything's fine with me, but there are things you need to know about your financial situation. Things Trevor hasn't told you." "What things?" "Dad, you're scaring me." "Not over the phone. Saturday afternoon. I'll make lunch. This conversation needs to happen in person. Trevor has a work conference this weekend. I can drive up Saturday morning." "Perfect. Just you. This conversation is between us." I spent Friday preparing the evidence presentation with the same methodical care I'd brought to engineering project briefings. Documents organized chronologically, each revelation building on the previous one, supporting evidence readily available. Emotional impact considered but secondary to factual accuracy. Tomorrow I would tell my daughter that her marriage was built on financial deception, that her home was in foreclosure, that her husband had tried to have her father declared incompetent, and that federal agents would soon arrest his parents for crimes committed using our family property. The truth would be devastating, but it would also set her free to make informed decisions about her future. That was worth the pain it would cause both of us. Saturday morning arrived with crystal clarity, the kind of Montana weather that reminded me why I'd chosen this place, despite everything that had happened here. I woke early, nervous in a way I hadn't been throughout this entire conflict. Facing Trevor and his parents required strategy and preparation. Facing my daughter with the truth required something much harder, the willingness to break her heart in order to save her life. "You bought our mortgage?" Shock transformed her expression completely. "How can you even do that? What does that mean?" "It means instead of losing your home to the bank, you and Trevor owe me now. I control whether you keep the house or lose it." She stood abruptly, emotion overwhelming logic. "This is insane. Why didn't you just tell me we were behind on payments? Would you have believed me? Or would Trevor have explained it away with another lie?" Then I showed her the rest, systematically and chronologically. The $45,000 HELOC Trevor had hidden from her, Douglas's $75,000 gambling debts, the federal mail fraud using my ranch address, the false APS complaint trying to have me declared incompetent, each piece of evidence carefully presented, each revelation building on the previous one. When I showed her the APS complaint where her husband had tried to strip away her father's legal rights, she broke completely. Not gentle tears, but wrenching sobs that shook her shoulders and reminded me of the child she'd been when her mother died. I let her cry without offering empty platitudes, just sitting present while she processed the destruction of everything she'd believed about her marriage. When she could speak again, "How long have you known all this?" "Pieces since May. Everything since July." "Months? You've known for months that my marriage was a lie and didn't tell me? If I had told you in May with no proof, would you have believed me? Or would Trevor have convinced you I was paranoid and vindictive?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Probably not." Eventually, I had to present the choice that would determine both our futures. "You have a decision to make, and you need to make it soon. Stay with Trevor or leave him." "How can I possibly decide that right now?" "Because federal agents are going to arrest Douglas and Patricia within the next 2 weeks for fraud. When that happens, everything becomes public. Your marriage will be investigated, questioned, examined by prosecutors and defense attorneys." The weight of it overwhelmed her. "This is too much. I can't think. If you leave Trevor and file for divorce, I'll forgive the entire mortgage debt. You'll own your house free and clear, and I'll help you rebuild your life however you want. If you stay with him, I can't protect you from what's coming. You're bribing me to leave my husband. I'm offering you a way out of a situation that will destroy you if you don't act. Whether you take it is your choice." She gathered her things hours later, emotionally exhausted, carrying copies of all the evidence. Before getting in her car, she turned back. "Did you ever think about what this would do to me? Learning all this, every single day since I found out. That's why I built such a strong case. So you'd know I wasn't exaggerating or being vindictive. I don't know if I can forgive you for waiting so long. I understand. But I'd rather have you angry at me for waiting than destroyed because you didn't know in time to protect yourself." 5 days later, Wednesday morning, federal agents executed arrest warrants for Douglas and Patricia in Phoenix. Garrett called to inform me as it happened. An hour later, my phone rang. "Dad, Trevor just got a call. His parents were arrested by federal agents. Something about fraud. Were you involved?" I reported crimes to the proper authorities. What happened after that was the justice system doing its job. Long silence. "I need to call you back." Friday afternoon, Trevor attempted to sell the house, desperately needing cash for legal defense. But the title search revealed that Glacier Ridge Holdings owned the mortgage. Saturday morning, a courier delivered my formal offer: complete debt forgiveness, $57,000 total, in exchange for signing divorce papers with no asset claims and waiving all rights to my property. Monday morning, Trevor appeared at Garrett's office looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in a week. He signed every document without reading them, defeated completely. Tuesday afternoon, Sarah called. Her voice was different, still processing trauma, but stronger. Dad, I filed for divorce yesterday. I can't stay in that house with all those memories. Can you help me find something near you? I want to start over. Relief flooded through me. Not triumph, just profound relief that my daughter was safe. 6 months later, I sat in federal court in Billings watching Douglas and Patricia receive their sentences. 2 years supervised probation, $68,000 in restitution and fines, permanent ban from federal benefit programs. They were fortunate to avoid prison. Sarah found a house in Whitefish, 20 minutes from my ranch. I provided the down payment as a gift. She secured a teaching position at the local elementary school and began building a new life free from financial deception. On a crisp September evening, we sat on my porch in matching rocking chairs I'd built in my workshop, watching elk graze in the clearing as the sun painted the mountains orange and purple. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly, "for fighting for me even when I didn't understand it, for being patient while I figured things out. You don't need to thank me. You're my daughter. I'll always fight for you. Look at that big bull elk. He's magnificent. That's my favorite. I see him almost every evening. Welcome to the neighborhood, honey." Later, after Sarah drove home to her own place, I remained on the porch watching stars emerge over the mountains. This wasn't the retirement I'd planned, but it was better, earned through integrity rather than luck, shared with my daughter rather than endured alone. The cabin door closed softly. The mountains stood silent, witnesses to peace hard won and deeply appreciated.